For some time, the US has had all the makings of fascism. Doesn't matter who is in office. If you have a look at the 14 characteristics of fascism, they have every single one of them. Every single one, to some degree or another. And when, at this time, there's this fever pitch of, we have to get rid of Trump. We have to get rid of him. I mean, you hear Michael Moore whipping everybody up, saying you've got to go out and stop and make sure that Trump is the last Republican that ever is in office. That's what he said, Michael Moore, who regularly shills for the Democratic Party every election. Like a Judas goat, in quotes. There are many people just like Michael Moore saying, we have to stop Trump. As if suddenly Trump has come out of nowhere, like an aberration, and he accidentally got in somehow, and here we are now on the precipice of fascism. And if we've been paying attention, we know that's not true. That Trump is not an aberration. He is just empire with the mask pulled off. It's like Groundhog Day. All over again, the Democrats, the Democratic Party, the corporate, neoliberal, warmongering party, which is just the right of one big party, and the far right is the GOP. What would they do without somebody like Trump? What would they do without a lumbering, as that saying goes, he's like a bull in a china shop, lumbering around, making a complete mess of some things, but doing exactly what the national security state want him to do with other things, meaning warmongering against China, intervening in Belarus, getting involved in all the usual things that every single warmongering president gets involved in. And to the chagrin of the Democratic Party, when he looks like he may actually do something that isn't warmongering, which he's not going to do. He's going to do exactly what the national security state want him to do. But if he looks like he's going the other way, the Democratic Party boo-hoos that. But the Democratic Party needs people like Trump. So Hillary Clinton, during her campaign, her 2016 campaign, and we found this out through WikiLeaks, actually her campaign tried to elevate Trump in the Pied Piper strategy. That's what they called it in the emails, the Podesta emails that were leaked by WikiLeaks. The Pied Piper strategy to elevate Trump. And the mainstream media elevated him, gave him hundreds of millions of dollars worth of advertising. Trump is bad for the country but good for business. I think it was Les Moonves, the disgraced CBS chief executive or something. That's what he said about Trump. So Trump is good for business, Trump is good for warmongering, and Trump is good for the Democratic Party because they need somebody like Trump so that they don't have to talk about their policies, which they have none. They have no policies. And Biden has said he would veto Medicare for all if it came across his desk, but it's not going to come across his desk because neither party wants that. You wouldn't want to give people Medicare for all at the time of a pandemic. Of course you wouldn't. The Democratic Party has no policies, really. And as Biden has said, nothing will fundamentally change if he got into office. And he's picked Kamala Harris, which is a slap in the face for anybody in the black community. It's just one big theater. It's so offensive, I can't bring myself to watch the Democratic National Convention and all their nonsense that's happening right now, pretending that they care about the public. I mean, how offensive is it? You can't even give people Medicare for all at a time of a pandemic, even though that Yale study said that Medicare for all would save 450 billion with a B every year, and it would save an extra 60 to 70,000 lives on top of it, and they still won't bring it in. They still won't. You heard me say this before, that I wish in some ways they'd just get it over with, because with the Democrats it's just going to be a slower route to fascism, but it's going to be fascism nonetheless, because they know that people are waking up, They also know they've taken everything from the public, and they have no intentions of giving them anything, and they have every intentions of continuing to serve their corporate masters. And also, imminent extinction is on the horizon because climate change is at this point, climate crisis is at this point run away. So they can see that massive social unrest is coming, and it will make these George Floyd protests, which are much more than the George Floyd issue, much more. It's going to make those protests look like a party, a picnic. When the SHIT really hits the fan, and it's coming, it's going to make these protests look like a party, a picnic, a little picnic in the park, basically. So I think, and I read this article today, and it kind of echoes what I think. I think the Democratic Party, if Michael Moore got his wishes and there was not another GOP POTUS again, another Republican president again, what would happen is still what would happen but in slow motion. What is going to happen, which is that they have to, it's a matter of course, they have to have a fascist state to be able to deal with the growing unrest and the fact that they have no intentions of giving the public anything. They're so stupid, they don't even care about the bread and circuses that keep the public placated. They don't even care. They haven't even woken up to the fact that you have to, at the very least, make sure throw enough crumbs to keep the public quiet. They have their heads so far up themselves, they don't even realize it, or they don't care. And also, if you don't allow people to protest non-violently, which is what is often the case, that they won't let people protest non-violently without massive suppression, either through the media, the mainstream media, where they don't represent the public's views, whether it's social media platforms that are tied very heavily to the military-industrial complex and the censorship that goes on there, and in the streets. Violent suppression of non-violent protests has been an ongoing theme in the United States. Remember Kent University? They shot and killed students. It's not something new. Look at Standing Rock, how they clamped down on that. If, say, Michael Moore gets his wish, and other people who are all focusing on Trump as if he's the problem, if they get their wish and there's never ever another Republican president, I can guarantee within the next 10 years there'll be some kind of a fascist system. I mean, an actual fascist system, not all the characteristics of it, but it will all come together as it's been going over the last decades and decades. This has all been leading up to this, decades of it. And like capitalism, it's in its end stages, and with that, it's inextricably linked to imperialism. And capitalism, in its end stages, is linked to fascism. It's just a matter of course, it has to go this way. It has to be like this. And focusing on Trump is like having a lower half of your leg, a lower half of a gangrenous leg that's all black and probably needs amputating at this point, and pointing out a little part of it that's maybe a bit more infected than the rest of it, and saying, look, we have to excise this and then everything will be better. That's what this is like. Carrying on about Donald Trump. Look, we'll excise this little area here that looks a little bit more inflamed than the rest of the blackened leg, and everything will be okay. Everything will be just fine. Just like that meme you see where the dog is sitting in a house that's burning down, saying, it's all fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. So I just want to quickly read a few paragraphs from this essay, and it's from the Mint Press News, and I'll leave a link to it and I'll give you the title in a second. And it talks about this. It basically talks about this issue and sort of indicates that there's all the makings of fascism here, no matter what party is going to be in power in the US. Obscured by this concentration on Trump's personality are the social, economic, and political conditions for a fascist transformation. In Europe of the 1930s, section of the ruling class in their respective countries accepted Hitler's and Mussolini's dictatorships for fear of working-class communist and socialist parties coming to political power. There is no such political contention in the contemporary US. Rather, some half of the eligible electorate does not bother to vote because they do not see their interests represented by either wing of the two-party duopoly. The other half trust that they live in a genuine democracy with real political choices. The US ruling class can impose their rule on the popular classes because the latter are either inactive or believe they are represented. If rule by and for the elites is accepted, why should the bourgeoisie squander this gift and opt for a more costly fascist dictatorship? Even if Donald Trump personally would aspire to be the first US Führer, he does not have sufficient backing from the ruling class, notably finance capital. Many military generals detest him. The foreign policy establishment does not trust him. At least half of the active duty service members are unhappy with him, and the so-called deep state security agencies, the FBI, CIA, NSA, are among his harshest critics. Trump might be able to mobilize some skinheads with gun show souvenirs, but these marginalized discontents would hardly be a match to the coercive apparatus of the world superpower. I'll just skip down here further. However, while a one-man coup can be dismissed, and, quote, October surprise, end quote, in the form of a military adventure cannot, there's nothing like a dandy little war, say a coup in Belarus, to boost a sitting president's approval rating 15%, and put him over the top in November. With US warships cruising for trouble in the South China Sea and the Democrats egging Trump for being soft on Beijing, even a dust-up with nuclear-armed China cannot be ruled out. And then he goes on to say this obsession with Trump is basically showing how the liberal class is completely lost, basically. And they're basically bankrupt. And, this whole thing of voting for the quote-unquote lesser evil. And look where that's got us, basically. Given their view of the danger of a fascist coup, we should put aside a progressive agenda and vote for the former senator from MasterCard and learn to love endless imperial war and increasing austerity for working people in a repressive security state. That's exactly right. That's exactly what they're asking people to do, again. The liberal left pundits reproach us to vote Democrats simply because the alternative is not Trump. Recall similar warnings about Bush and Romney, who are now chums of Democrats in high places. Vote, but not for any issue, because the so-called liberal agenda is today devoid of issues. Liberalism is dead. Indicative is its standard-bearer barely showing signs. Biden is being told to stay in the basement and even sit out his nominating convention. And of course the Democratic Party sabotaged Sanders twice, and Sanders let them do it and didn't call them out. And now Sanders is pushing Joe Biden for all his worth. I mean, these are the people that give this awful Democratic Party some semblance of being an alternative, because they kind of throw an occasional left policy at the public and gives this veneer, very thin veneer, that the Democratic Party is some kind of party of diversity and has left values. These people really are the Judas goats that take the public, once again, into the slaughterhouse. These people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders are like the bait that keeps the public that's not paying attention in this delusion that the Democratic Party has left values, some kind of left values. And yet, of course, AOC and Bernie Sanders are at the very least soft imperialists. And AOC has already sold people out a number of times. And of course, Bernie Sanders has many, many times. And the biggest sellout, of course, is once again just completely capitulating to the Democratic Party. And now he's promoting Joe Biden. He was never serious about the revolution. Never serious. And I mean, the man, even in about 8 months ago or 7 months ago, was threatening to bomb Iran, which has 80 million people. 80 million people. And people still think he's some kind of, I mean, really and truly. When I pointed that out to people, they didn't want to know, and in fact thought I was, trying to sabotage Sanders. No, Sanders is sabotaging himself. He sabotages himself over and over again. Imagine if you had somebody in the GOP saying, I'm going to bomb, I'd bomb Iran, 80 million people. Would they be excusing that person? Probably not. It's ridiculous. And this is why you have Trump. Because you keep excusing these people that are soft imperialists and also continue to sell people out. They sound really good in their speeches. AOC sounds really dramatic and really earnest and appalled at what's happening, and yet she signs off on things. Bernie Sanders signs off on things. If you're in the Democratic Party, that's where social movements go to die. And I bet you people will, next election, if there is an election, next election, it'll be some other, some other monster, some other person that they'll be saying, you have to vote for us. And they won't be offering Medicare for all. It's just going to go on like that. So why do people keep playing this game? This big scam? People have to stop it now. Have to stop. And even if that means that you get to this destination of awfulness quicker than if you kept voting for this awful Democratic Party, it's coming anyway, this awful end, because it has the 14 characteristics of fascism are already there in one form or another, and the Democratic Party is going to take people there anyway. It might take longer, and meanwhile, the climate emergency just gets more and more ridiculous. It might take longer, but it's coming, because it's all there, and they're totally on board with it. Totally on board with it. This writer goes on to say, short of a fascist coup by Trump, the liberal left has legitimate concerns. A rightward spectre is haunting the US and beyond with serious consequences. White supremacy remains seminal in a nation founded on the expropriation of indigenous and the exploitation of African slaves. The decline of living standards and an ever more precarious workforce are reaching crisis proportions with the pandemic. The worst is yet to come, creating a political dynamic of discontent that can swing either left or right. And of course, there's about 30 million people are already on the precipice of being evicted. And what has the Democratic Party done, really, to stop that from happening? Really and truly. And they can't even give them Medicare for all at a time of pandemic. Rather than merely replacing the current White House occupant with one with better table manners, more radical measures are called for. What remains is a political theatre of two neoliberal parties vehemently contesting matters of style and colluding on matters of substance. The two major parties concur: bail out Wall Street, renew the Patriot Act, increase the military budget, modernize the nuclear arsenal, prepare for war with China, pursue regime change in Venezuela, etc. And that's exactly right. For all that they go on, the Democratic Party go on about how dangerous Trump is, they never ever do not support Donald Trump's military spending, the $750 billion here, the $750 billion there. I mean, it's just ongoing. Do you ever see them not supporting that? They all support it. In fact, the Democratic Party didn't even want to endorse a bill that was brought in to reduce the military budget by 10%. They couldn't even support that. So if they truly believed Donald Trump was dangerous, they would not be giving him these huge military budgets, would they? They're totally on board with it, and they're totally fine with it. And there's a lot of people who call themselves progressive that just pretend that's not a problem. Pretend it's not a problem. They don't care about the imperialist wars that kill millions of black and brown people overseas. They only care about getting some crumbs from the table or not having Trump. The trajectory of neoliberalism has entailed a concentration of economic and political power coupled with increasingly authoritarian and imperialistically aggressive state. The trajectory converges with fascism. A pervasive security state and the coercive apparatus of fascism are in fact already in place. According to the DNC, quote, Democrats have made modernizing our military a top priority, end quote, along with supporting our, quote, national security personnel, end quote. Ditto for the Republicans. Hitler physically liquidated the trade unions along with the left political parties. He censored the press and engaged in a massive military buildup. In the US today, union density has declined to 10.3% of the workforce. No countervailing left political organizations of consequence exist. The mainstream media echo Washington and the military budget balloons. Neither the historical example nor the current one is free of the defects of racism and xenophobia. Perhaps the salient political question for the 2020 electoral season is not whether there will be a fascist coup, but how would we know? And that's by Roger D. Harris from State Central Committee of the Peace and Freedom Party, the only ballot-qualified socialist party in California. Yes, indeed. How would we know? Because, like, for all that people go on about how hideous Trump is, all those facets of fascism are in place. It's fertile ground, and it doesn't really matter who's in power. Inevitably, it's coming. You can see it coming. And it'll just mean there'll be somebody, maybe with some better manners, who will bring it on. Somebody who's not Trump, or somebody worse than Trump. But it'll be somebody heading either party that will bring us here.